January 6, 2021 was not just Trump's doing. It was a consequence of a decades-long effort to dismantle American government. It's not how these libertarian oil magnates hoped it would happen, but their incremental plan to destroy the institutions of American democracy began almost half a century ago. And now a whole new generation of billionaires has joined the libertarian movement. These are the funders behind a party designated to remove the annoying limits that government has tried to place on their power. Our story today has three parts. We'll start by describing the libertarian ideology and how it's taken over the Republican Party. Then we'll look at who and what are empowering the so-called liberty groups and how they target state policy. Finally, we'll start planning how each of us can help take back our own state. So first, let's look at the Libertarian Party platform. Back in 1980, guess who ran on this libertarian ticket 46 years ago? To be abolished. The Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, the FCC, and on and on and on to Social Security, welfare, public schools, and taxation. Boy, does that sound familiar, huh? Who was it? David Koch. And in 1980, his platform only received 1% of the vote. Take a look at this platform. Whose do you think this was? Economic growth, world at peace, family, community, workplace, and fulfill the hopes and aspirations of all Americans, black, white, women, men, young, old, urban, rural. Who wanted that? Jimmy Carter? No. It was Republican conservative paragon Ronald Reagan. But libertarians formed the Republican Party Liberty Caucus. Its mission was to convert the Republican Party platform of Ronald Reagan into the libertarian platform of David Koch. And they're not too far from succeeding. Are these libertarians who authored Project 2025 Reagan conservatives? No. So how have they convinced people, when only 1% supported them in 1980, that dismantling government is now a good idea? Well, in 2001, a Yale political science student named Jason Sorens suggested that if they collect all the libertarian 1% and move them into a single state, they could take over the state and slash state and local budgets to force government to dismantle. The Free State Project would start when 5,000 people signed up to move, and in 2003, they reached their target for signups and chose New Hampshire as their libertarian homeland. The influx began. So who are the Free Staters? Well, many of them are just sort of 21st century hippies. They want to farm or start a small business, smoke their weeds, shoot their guns. The cult attracts more men than women. A Boston TV series interviewed a young man who said he'd never had a friend before he joined the Free Staters. They have regular meetups, help newcomers move, host music festivals, and provide other social support. These are just a few of the Free State Project leaders interfering with good government in our state. I won't name them all, but the fellow in the middle is Free State Project founder Jason Sorens. He was named a fellow in the Koch-funded Libertarian Mercatus Center at George Mason University back in 2008 and served there since. And in 2018, the Kochs donated $1 million to St. Anselm's College, and then St. Anselm's hired Sorens to direct their Center for Ethics in Society. And just so you don't suspect that what I'm saying here is just another conspiracy theory, here the Free Staters explicitly state their affiliation with their political arm, the Liberty Alliance, and with the Kochs' Americans for Prosperity. But libertarians are all over the U.S., not just in New Hampshire. Many young libertarians see the problems caused by the Koch's fossil fuel industry, Citizens United, and the rest of the military-industrial complex taking over the government, but they've been brainwashed by those same groups to blame democracy and rule by majority for the evils, saying, "I did not consent to be part of this republic." They don't seem to realize that public infrastructure and government are the foundation for their comfortable lives. They don't see that the Consumer Protection Bureau fights against plutocratic greed and that the EPA protects their air and water against industrial pollution. They want to get rid of democracy and the rule of law. When you hear libertarians talk about liberty and freedom, they mean freedom from the regulations and responsibilities of citizens in a republic governed by representative democracy. They want no responsibility for educating children, no child welfare regulations, no hazardous waste or clean air restrictions. The sovereign individual has no responsibility to anyone but themselves. No nursing homes or Social Security, because old people should be taken care of by their families. Children born into poverty, well, it sucks to be you, not my problem. They don't seem to understand that getting rid of laws does not wipe the monopoly board clean so everyone can start with the same amount of cash. In reality, billionaires, large corporations, even the Chinese government, they already have the monopoly game equivalent of starting with hotels on all the good properties. By dismantling government of the people, you free those forces to monopolize everything and lease it back to the public. You can read how libertarians expect national governments to disappear after cryptocurrency makes it impossible to collect taxes. Of course, crypto transactions are all secret. And you can read how they expect plebeians like us to be left to fight among ourselves in independent villages for the scraps left by the mega-rich. Note that the preface to this edition is written by Peter Thiel, funder of Vice President J.D. Vance. So how did we get from the Republican platform of Ronald Reagan to this libertarian agenda that is driving policy in many states in the nation now? We'll look next at just how they thwart public interest to take over state policy. Let's zip back to 1980 for a minute. After David Koch won only 1% of the electorate, the brothers signed on to fund a multi-decade plan to take over the government by other means. You can read in Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, how the Kochs and their wealthy colleagues owned companies plagued by hundreds of millions in fines from the EPA, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has taken their firms to court. A jury awarded $200 million against them for defrauding the government. Well, their father was a leader in the John Birch Society and taught the Koch boys that government is evil. So naturally, they supported a party whose goal was to destroy the agencies and government plaguing them. Well, the Koch network is notorious for the extent of its capture of both governmental and civil institutions, especially after it pushed through the Citizens United decision that let them spend without limit on elections. The Koch network took over media outlets, set up think tanks and activist groups in each state, donated to colleges to hire libertarian faculty. It lobbied for laws to make the wealthy wealthier and helped the Federalist Society stack the courts. For instance, in New Hampshire, they set up Americans for Prosperity New Hampshire as their lobbying arm. They funded the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy, chaired by their MIT friend John H. Sununu. And later, the Kochs donated $1 million to St. Anselm's in 2018. And St. Anselm's, as we said before, made Free State Project founder Jason Sorens the director of a libertarian-focused Center for Ethics and Society. So now you've seen some of the players behind the liberty agenda. Next, let's track just how these groups work together to thwart the will of the majority and promote billionaire libertarian interests while actually harming many Free State and Liberty Alliance members, as well as the general public. We'll replay how so-called education freedom account vouchers became law in New Hampshire. In February 2021, the New Hampshire House heard the original voucher bill. In the largest participation ever seen, 3,168 signed in to oppose the bill, and only 600 signed in favor. The bill started from ALEC. As many of you know, ALEC is a group funded by corporations and wealthy individuals to write templates for state bills. They feed templates, such as educational vouchers, to state legislators through their ALEC chairs. Ken Weiler was our New Hampshire chair. Interestingly, Representative Ken Weiler studied at the MIT School of Engineering at the same time as both David and Charles Koch, and later New Hampshire Governor John Sununu. Well, Ken is an ALEC chair, and that means that it's his job to shepherd ALEC bills into law. Ken leads the New Hampshire House Finance Committee 1, responsible for the state budget. In order to avoid any further public discussion of the unpopular voucher bill, Representative Weiler had it tabled and slid it into the massive budget. But why did elected legislators support hiding the unpopular bill instead of killing it? Well, Americans for Prosperity had paid young folks to canvass to get them elected. In 2024, a Texas libertarian group called the Young Americans for Liberty spent $1 million to put Free State and Liberty Alliance voting candidates into the New Hampshire legislature. The Young Americans for Liberty, by the way, also runs a training program to teach state candidates, probably including yours, to vote libertarian. If you take a close look at this slide, you might recognize some of the people here. So that is why legislators backed Representative Weiler's move to hide the unpopular voucher bill in the budget. Then came Greg Moore, head of Koch's Americans for Prosperity, New Hampshire. You can see him here proudly standing in front of the Citizens United decision. He had the AFP send out tens of thousands of postcards about the voucher bill that say, "What would you do with $4,600 toward your children's education?" Then, the Libertarian Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy distributed a policy paper to legislators and the press in support of the bill. Since the bill was tabled and hidden in the budget, the public never got to discuss it again. The budget passed with the voucher bill. Governor Sununu signed it, saying he couldn't veto an entire budget just because of one item. After the vouchers and other Liberty Alliance priorities passed, the vice president of the Charles Koch Institute, William Ruger, there in the center, and Free State founder Sorens named New Hampshire the freest of the 50 states. Governor Sununu attended the ceremony at the Libertarian Cato Institute. We talked about the Kochs being plagued by regulations, but why are billionaire libertarians so set on destroying public education? Not just in New Hampshire, but also at the federal level. Of course, if they could close the public schools, taxes would drop. But another reason is just as important. Children must be taught to oppose their right to public services, democracy, and equal opportunity. The power of teachers' unions has to be crushed. And meanwhile, billionaires don't mind hiring low-skilled labor for less. Some of them, such as Betsy DeVos, own for-profit education companies that benefit from tax-funded vouchers. And then there's the unspoken goal, which the chair of the New Hampshire House Education Committee is now actually promoting, resegregating the schools. But vouchers are hardly the only issue. In order for you to understand how determined libertarians are to quash anyone who disagrees with them, I need you to listen to the Young Americans for Liberty president, Sean Temia. He flew from Texas in order to ask New Hampshire legislators to vote against allowing public nonprofits and officials to speak up at hearings, to lobby for public interest. He's citing gas taxes here in a specific example of interest to Texans, but the bill he's lobbying for would stop anyone from speaking in the public interest if they were paid with taxpayer money. Please listen.
We are starting the charge to make liberty win and ensure that we can continue fighting in New Hampshire. These things like ending taxpayer-funded lobbying, right? The notion that the Department of Transportation can take your money and spend that money on paying a gas tax lobbyist to go out and advocate for a higher gas tax seems a little silly, right? Seems like something that should garner bipartisan support. Your tax money should not be spent on lobbyists who want to enhance the government.
If this Liberty Alliance bill passed, the Municipal Association could not testify about bills affecting towns. The Department of Children, Youth, and Families could not testify about children. School superintendents could not testify about schools. And likely the same bill is being discussed in your state legislature. This bill did not pass in New Hampshire in 2024, so they brought it back in 2025 and again in January of 2026. It failed again. Ironically, just 2 days before the vote to silence public lobbyists, Americans for Prosperity sent New Hampshire House members an arm-twisting letter lobbying them to vote for a statewide cap on education funding. But that bill failed as well. 22 Republicans were brave enough to join Democrats in voting against the billionaire lobbyists' instructions. And that is due to the work by people like you and me, standing up against oppression by the mega-rich. So we are on a roll. No matter what craziness is going on in D.C., we know that we can make a difference if we focus on our own states. First, we need to remember that even in New Hampshire, libertarians are still a small segment of voters. We don't have to let them dominate our legislatures and tip the scale on governorships. In fact, New Hampshire's new director of the Libertarian Free State Project wrote that a reason he moved here was that libertarians lost control of his home state of Maine in 2018 and they never regained it. That is what happens when the public realizes what these folks are up to. People don't support libertarian anarchistic policies. So how do we remove the so-called liberty candidates from the legislature? Well, the first step is to wake people up. Make them realize what is going on. Once people understand what's happening, they're motivated to help stop it. You can wake people up to the libertarian offensive by sharing this presentation. That's the first of the 6 steps to reduce liberty groups' dominance in state government. But we only need to focus on 3 more for now. After we build awareness, the second is to network outside our bubble, then ID libertarian candidates and name them, and 4, ensure that good candidates are running to replace them. Networking outside our bubble builds trust and connections with people different from ourselves. This is actually fun, because what it means is joining a service club, taking a course, helping at church supper, going dancing, contra dancing, square dancing. We connect by sharing joyful activities together and getting to know each other. Step 3 is identifying the anti-democracy libertarian candidates, both at the state and local levels. Granite State Matters website has bullets on how to identify anti-democracy so-called liberty candidates in your states and towns. Once we identify libertarian candidates, many groups post their names on websites and send out postcards or include their names and voting records in emails. Of course, it's no use identifying liberty candidates unless you have good candidates to run against them. If you're in an all-red district, that means working early at the primary level. Republicans strong enough to withstand the pressure to vote against liberty bills need your support. Liberty groups will primary them. The hurricane of BS coming from DC is not going to stop, but we don't have to let ourselves be overwhelmed by it. If we focus on our states and can awaken others to focus, in 2026, we don't just need to elect people with backbone, we need to be the backbone. So let's focus on retaining democracy in our states. Help build awareness of what is happening in your state. You can start by sharing this video on social media. Focus attention on state and local issues that residents of your state can actually impact. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you ignore federal candidates, but typically the major parties are focused on them, and they often ignore crucial state and local elections. ID anti-democracy, so-called liberty candidates by name. Make sure good candidates oppose them and highlight the importance of voting all the way down the ballot to low-level offices, because that's where libertarians often start. These are your action items. If we work together, we can save democracy in our states. It's all about community and connection, and it needn't stop us from enjoying our lives despite the chaos and craziness around us. So don't just vote for candidates with backbone. Be the backbone. Thank you.